Wing Chun is famous for its focus on controlling and trapping an opponent's arms. This specialisation in trapping means, however, that against a fellow Wing Chun practitioner you are yourself prone to being trapped. This short video offers several ways of preventing this from happening. Good Wing Chun training encourages the view that the prevention is better than the cure. In this context, this means that in order to avoid having your arms trapped, you need to stop or evade the opponent's initial LARP sal, since if they can't LARP you in the first place, they can't trap you. Smaller students will be familiar with the problem of a larger, stronger opponent using their strength to force the arms down into a trap, and implementing this methodology should go a long way towards countering this. One of the first things to take into account when working on how to prevent LARPs is the length of your mun sal. Since a longer mun sal is easier to LARP than a shorter one, it may be advisable to shorten it, leaving more of a bend in the arm. This also makes it easier to engage the lat muscle in your back and use it to connect the shape more solidly to your trunk. The shorter arm also creates a more triangular shape, which tends to give less easily. This also makes it easier to manoeuvre into shapes which can cancel out a LARP sal, which will be looked at next. It's important not to have too short a mun sal though, as this can allow your opponent to reach you too easily. Regardless of a student's experience, probably the most fail-safe way to prevent the opponent from LARPing the arm is to resort to your basics, and begin by using some of the fundamental shapes of the system. Taan sal is an excellent shape to use to stop people LARPing you. Its compact nature and the fact that it is strong in the direction it's being pulled make it very difficult for the person LARPing to compromise the structure of the shape. As well as killing the LARP, collapsing your elbow into the centre line and twisting your wrist so the palm faces up has the effect of raising your opponent's elbow if they insist on holding on to you, particularly if they are using their thumb to do so. This gives you the opportunity to hit beneath it or take control of their arm. In grappling martial arts such as jiu-jitsu, they employ something called the 5-second rule, which means the person applying the lock does so slowly and gradually, giving the opponent time to feel it and submit in time to prevent injury. When practicing ideas such as the one shown here, it would be advisable to use this rule. The whipping of the elbow into the centre line and the height of the wrist are integral to making the shape effective at stopping LARPs. What makes Taan a particularly good choice for new students is that since they practice this idea so much in Lok Sao and Chi Sao, it should be quite a natural motion for them to perform, and the fact that the shape forms an integral part of the role in either drill means by now they should be instinctively positioning the aforementioned joints correctly. A slightly more difficult shape called Dip Sao can also be used to the same effect, as it is a derivative of Taan, and the wrist and the elbow are in the same positions. However, this shape tends to require greater flexibility in the wrist and elbow than Taan, so would be best reserved for more experienced students, and even then, since more simple ideas tend to work best under pressure, they would be advised to use Taan. A stronger opponent may be able to move your frame when LARPing particularly forcefully. This is not really a problem, since to regain stability all you need to do is pivot your back leg, which you will most likely find yourself doing naturally anyway. The Taan itself shouldn't be compromised no matter how much strength they use. There are occasional exceptions to this, but providing you keep the arm short and bent, preferably keep your shoulder down in its socket to engage the lat, and don't let your elbow stray too far from your hip, this shape will be incredibly strong. Another option when stopping LARPs is Jump Sao. The basic Jump Sao shape from the first section of the first form is an effective shape for doing this. Since newer students spend a good deal of their time working on this part of the form, they may find this a good starting point for preventing themselves from being LARPed. Contracting the wrist while keeping the hand pointing directly up with strength in the fingers and thumb will help to shut down the LARP, in conjunction with keeping the elbow lower than the wrist and not letting it stray too far forward of your hip. As with your mun sao and Taan, what will also help stop the opponent getting your arm is pushing your shoulder down to engage the lat. Your opponent's grip can then easily be broken by simply pushing the wrist forward. The danger of this though is that it can encourage them to elbow forward, so it would be advisable to have your Wu Sao ready to deal with this, using a Deng Sao type shape to block or monitor their arm. A safer way to free the arm is to use gum sow as shown here. This also works well when you stop the LARP with Taan and in exercises such as gore sow is arguably preferable, since you may not necessarily want to stop the flow of the drill by restraining the arm, and also may not want to include strikes in the drill at this stage of training. Gum sow is also a viable way of evading the LARP in the first place. Students should be familiar with this movement from the second section of the first form. You'll generally accelerate the arm in the direction it's being pulled. In order to escape the LARP, you need to accelerate the gum sow so that it's travelling faster than your opponent's arm. This, combined with the bouncing motion at the end of the move, will enable you to free your hand. In some interpretations of the first form, the gum sow bounces up into Laan, as opposed to pausing beforehand. Since accelerating your hand down and away from you can potentially leave you unprotected, this idea of bouncing your hand back up can be utilised to good effect in order to bring your hand to a high position swiftly to cover yourself. In the early stages of a student's training, they learn to use the basic pulling and pushing motion of their mun sow and wu sow to pull their lead hand free of a LARP while simultaneously replacing it with their rear hand. The pitfall of this in application is that with less experienced students, this process will be repeated again and again as the opponent persistently tries to capture the lead hand, leading to somewhat scrappy and mindless training. It is therefore arguably preferable in evading a LARP to keep the same hand forward. If you watch my left hand, I'm holding my own well enough without repeatedly changing. Instead of changing guards, I'm able to easily shut down my partner's LARP with my Taan sow. Again here. Of course, you'd need to change guard hands sometimes, but you should avoid continually doing so. Providing you have the tactility and timing for it, circling your hand to evade your opponent's grab is very effective, since it makes it very difficult for him to ever get hold of your arm. Here I'm using a jump sow to hook onto Tom's arm and draw him in. A larp sow-like idea. To regain his hand, he circles and uses a gum sow type shape to get on top of mine. That's a good response by him. If your opponent does manage to grab your wrist, you can still circle your hand inside their arm and break their grip by pushing your palm forward. Students of all levels will recognise this movement from the form. It works from outside to inside gate, or vice versa. This idea also works with the previously mentioned shapes. If you can't stop your opponent from taking your arm for whatever reason, it's best just to relax and let them have it. Although it leaves you prone, it does teach you to relax, rather than panic and start resisting and stiffening up, which can actually make you more vulnerable. Since this stiffness makes it much easier for your opponent to manipulate your arm and thus your entire body. To illustrate the problems of being stiff, Tom stiffens up and I use a jerking motion to jolt him out of his stance and leave his face and throat exposed. Here he's stiffened up when I've larped him, which has enabled me to use Laan sow just to walk him. Here, because his arm and body have stiffened, I can just turn him by turning my hip and elbow, and then I can shove him with Po Pai, which you may recognise from the dummy form. This situation can be illustrated by this simple example. If your arms are stiff, your partner can move your entire frame and destabilise you quite easily. However, if you completely relax your arms and let him bear their weight, he has far less control over your body. The risk you take when letting them have your arm is that you now have only one arm to protect yourself with. Once they have your arm, they're likely to throw another punch, with a view to trapping your defending arm. In order to stop this, you'll need to counter-larp as the punch comes in. This can be done by meeting the arm and then larping, or by catching the arm as it approaches. Once you've larped their arm, they can be easily trapped themselves. Bear in mind you'll need superior timing to your opponent to turn the tables on them in this way. An effective way to do that is once you meet their arm, simply pull it straight down, like this. Because Tom is still gripping my arm with his LARPing arm from when he tried to LARP me, all I need to do is grip his forearm and he ends up trapping himself, leaving you free to attack at leisure. You may have done this in Lotzau, and it's easier to see it here, where Tom does it to me. From the roll, I throw a straight attack. Tom intercepts it with his lead guard hand, simply pulls the arm down, and because I'm still holding his wrist from where I LARPed him, all he has to do is grip my forearm and I end up trapping myself. And because it's very difficult to think quickly enough to let go of his arm, I'm stuffed. And just one more full speed one. Their attack can also be defended inside gate, which is perfectly viable, but this does tend to increase the likelihood of being hit, particularly if they throw a round punch, since the only tool you really have to block it with is a park sow, which is not ideal. You can also intercept if you feel confident in your reactions and striking ability. There's also the possibility they'll strike with the same arm they LARPed you with, in which case you follow the arm and cover with guark sow or spade hand. You can then LARP them back and follow up if you wish. You might recognize this idea from the LARP sow drill, which we're doing here in its simplest form. If you're not familiar with the shape, just remember to keep your elbow in and your fingers pointing outwards. One other option if they manage to get control of your arm is to use freeing hands to regain it. It's very effective for getting your wrist free, but as you can see, it can leave both your hands low momentarily. And you can see I'm completely exposed. So it's probably best to deal with your opponent's free hand before you try to free your own. You might wonder why we're practicing it so softly. It's because in order for you to free your hand, you have to smash your forearm against your opponent's thumb joint. And I suspect my partner didn't want to get his thumb broken. There are other ways to deal with LARP, like stepping in aggressively to shut down your partner and smother their arms with bong. But I haven't gone into those here because the extra footwork adds extra variables and thus extra things that can go wrong. So start with simple shapes that use simple footwork and are thus more reliable, like the ones featured earlier. For newer students, Taan is probably the easiest and most effective choice. It's a simple shape, and not only does it deal with the LARP, it compromises your opponent. For more tactile, experienced students, circling hands would be the ideal, as your goal should be to never get LARPed, never mind trapped. We can't assume a technique will work against everyone, so you'll need at least one other option as a backup plan. So for instance, if you find that Taan doesn't work against one person, have Jum as an alternative. I'm a smaller guy, and therefore I spent so many years having bigger people trying to LARP me, wrap their hands around my narrow wrists, and use their strength to trap me, that I've practiced using Taan so much that I just can't do it wrong. So I'm afraid I don't have any footage of it not working for me, because it just never fails me. But it might not necessarily work as well for you. Therefore, practice the other shapes so that you can fall back on those if needed, and find out which ones work best for you. Students should find that all these ideas work against most people most of the time, which is about as much as you can ask of any technique in the martial arts. I hope you're able to use something you learnt in this video. If you could like and subscribe, that would be much appreciated. Also check out the links here for these other videos about other fundamental Wing Chun ideas. Thanks for watching.